Hey guys, this is Graham. I am an author, illustrator, and truck driver in Oklahoma City. I am trying to get out of the truck full time and into the writing desk full time. You can help me do that by checking out my books on Amazon and watching this channel. Now on to the video. I've read 3 different biographies about Civil War officers. Ron Chernow's book about Ulysses Grant, S.C. Gwynn's book about Stonewall Jackson, and Mitchum's book about Nathan Bedford Forrest, which was just an incredible read. I would like to add William Tecumseh Sherman to that list. I haven't read one about him. And I've got Douglas Southall Freeman's books about Robert E. Lee that I still haven't dug into. But during a recent sale on Audible, back when they put a whole bunch of books in my wish list down to like $3, so I decided not to pass a whole bunch of them up. I saw one pop up in the recommendations, and it's this book by William Davis. It's a biography of Jefferson Davis. And I thought, I've got a decent grasp of the military side of the Civil War, but I'd never really read anything about the political side of it, and I didn't know all that much about the man who was an American president with a giant asterisk on American. He was the president of the Confederacy. And I thought it would be interesting and informative to look up the life of this man, what drove him to do what he did, and what things were like for him after the war. This was a 30-hour audiobook monstrosity, and I didn't read it all the way through. Even though I found it really intriguing and compelling in parts, it wasn't one that I just wanted to burn through all at once, like the Grant or the Stonewall Jackson book. Nevertheless, it was a rewarding read, and when I got down to the last 4 hours or so of it, I was able to just kill it all in one go. And I'm glad that I did. I would give it somewhere between 3 and 4 stars, and I would make a recommendation for it for anybody who's a student of this era of American history. So Jefferson Davis was from Mississippi. He was the youngest of 10 kids, and his parents were already old and also kind of broke when he was born. He was mostly raised by his siblings, and he, from an early age, showed a penchant for, we'll say, splitting hairs when it came to regulations. And the way that William Davis, the author, no relation or some relation possibly, unclear. The way that it depicts this particular aspect of his character, climate protester, it shows that he started on from an early age being able to justify himself in just about anything that he did. In fact, he almost never, or probably never, admitted he was ever wrong in anything, and he was very, very good at circular arguments, or even, when necessary, bad faith arguments to depict himself as being right. He's basically every hyper-partisan troll that you've ever had to argue with on the internet, but maybe a little bit more intellectually honest than that, as long as it suited his interests. When he was growing up, he realized that his financial prospects were going to be slim and few, and so he followed the time-honored and trusted and true path of going into the military and then going into politics. While he was in the military, he got in trouble a couple of times, breaking regulations, going out and getting drunk and rowdy with the boys when he ought not to have. And whenever he faced, what's the right word, like tribunals or panels or judgment for his actions, he again showed that inclination to split hairs and say, oh, I didn't really break the rules. I was only doing this. I was only doing that. Technically, it was this. Like, that's an important thread to follow throughout his life. Especially after his military career. Like many men of his era, he fought in the Mexican-American War before entering U.S. politics. If you ever look at the elections of the mid-1800s, the candidates are almost all Mexican-American War veterans. And then those same people would go on to lead both sides in the Civil War. You'll see a lot of those names pop up over and over. Jefferson Davis where was I? Whatever. He was married once. His first wife died after just a couple of months, and then his second wife was about half his age when they got married. She was just under 20, and he was in his mid-30s. And their marriage was turbulent at first, but it got better. And then she became an indispensable companion to him as the Civil War years went on. I think it was good to read just where he was and where his mind was when Lincoln's election came along. It wasn't just that it was Lincoln who got elected, it was how he got elected that was a major spark for the southern states seceding. He didn't win with anywhere near we'll say a majority in a binary sense. I believe he only had, to the extent that it matters, and it doesn't because the Electoral College exists, and that's a good thing. I think he only had like 39% of the popular vote, and they were hyper-fixated on that in the South, as well as not trusting his intentions towards their localized sovereignty. They were very committed to the idea of states being able to govern themselves and the Fed just being this entity that they use to interact with each other. And their supposition was that Lincoln was going to use the power of the Fed and the abolitionist inclinations of the northern states to then mock the South and tell them how they ought to run themselves. This is one of the tricky parts of navigating the politics of the Civil War, because the South wasn't overtly rebelling so that they could keep slavery. They were overtly rebelling so that they could govern themselves. It just happened to be that in this instance, so that they could keep slavery. And they wanted to spread slavery perhaps to other states. I'm not saying this as an apologetic, sort of make excuses for them. It's also not so clean cut as they wanted to keep slavery. They had to keep slavery. Like slavery was their highest value. It was the autonomy and the self-governance that was their highest value. But it was the issue of slavery that brought that self-governing streak to the surface. There's complexity to that I think needs to be preserved. And I think it's also important to realize that if the North had won outright, if the North had beaten the South as quickly as they supposed they would not have abolished slavery right away. It's hard to say when or if they would have done so. There were abolitionists in the North. This is something that I'm digging through now with my own reading. Abraham Lincoln was not one of them. He even gave a slavery forever speech at the beginning of his administration. It was a matter of this cluster of states not liking this particular politician and throwing their fist in the air and saying, hey, we are the resistance, we are the rebellion. I wonder if anybody's done that recently. Anyway, but I digress. To get back on track with Jefferson Davis, his story was about navigating the political side of it, his ascendance to the Confederate presidency, and his role in managing the personalities around him, as well as the supply trains to the military, and his successes and failures in that. There was a chapter at the close of the book that played out a what-if scenario wherein Abraham Lincoln was in charge of the Confederacy and Jefferson Davis was in charge of the Union. And you could possibly imagine what these two men would have done with the resource advantages or disadvantages that the respective sides enjoyed. And I find that to be a productive thought exercise because it analyzes whether these men were really indispensable to their sides or to what extent they were, and the roles they played in the successes and failures of their factions. My personal opinion is that the Civil War, due to the qualities of the American spirit, ended up becoming necessary so that both sides would eventually undergo the spiritual change necessary to abolish slavery. Because again, at the outset, they didn't want to. There were abolitionists in the North, but the North and the Union as an institution was not headed in that direction. So far as I understand, I can still read something that persuades me otherwise. I guess we'll see. But I've read in other books that Lincoln underwent a spiritual change in about the third year of the war, and that's what led him to kind of change his ideas on slavery and emancipation. And there are other accounts that I've read, not just of individuals, but in the South as a whole, changing its idea of the ideas of like black liberation and freeing slaves. And the South wanted to spread west and spread slavery to other states, but they were also open to offering freedom to like slaves and black troops that would fight for the Confederacy to keep the war going. I mean, that's kind of a mark of how desperate they were for men and for resources. It's a big, complicated picture. It's never as easy as saying that this side wanted slavery and the other side wanted to abolish it, and they fought and they won. Like, it's a huge, messy ordeal, and that's why I'm still reading 30-hour audiobooks about the different figures in it. But overall, I thought it was fascinating to read about the personality and the mindset of Jefferson Davis and the ways in which he helped the Confederacy establish itself and hold on for as long as it did, and also like his own failings and shortcomings that played a role in it not succeeding. There were some timeline clarifications that I appreciated at the end of this book as well. Davis didn't immediately know that Lee had surrendered at Appomattox, and because it was more of a military conflict than a political conflict, Lee's surrender really marked the end of the major movements of the war, even though the Confederacy as a political entity was still trying to exist, and Jefferson Davis was trying to flee the country to find a new solution for the South to carry on. Lincoln was assassinated before Jefferson Davis was captured by the North, and they understandably concluded that it must have been some Confederate plot and not just John Wilkes Booth and his conspirators acting of their own accord. And so there was that extra bit of animosity when the North finally did catch up to him, and they really wanted that final W. They wanted to put paid to the whole Civil War thing and not just capture this guy and put him through the legal rigmarole of what he did, but also completely demoralize him and ruin his image in the eyes of the South and the nation as a whole. There was even a story that the author clarified about how when he was caught, the reports were that he was dressed as a woman and trying to disguise himself to flee the country. No, what happened was he was so piss poor broke and threadbare and short on resources that he really only had the clothes that he was wearing, and it was cold outside, and he was wearing they called it a raglan and a shawl. That these were, is unisex the right word? Meaning that men or women can wear them. This is an item of clothing that men or women could wear when it was cold outside, but the one that he had was for a woman. I think it belonged to his wife, and so the soldiers were like, "Yeah, we caught him wearing women's clothes," and then the reports went through permutations as the story spread, and that led to this misconception at first that he was running around in hoop skirts and a wig, trying to evade the Union. But no, he was trying to get out of the country, but not like that. Talks about his trial, talks about his financial hardships after the war, and his contributions to Rise and Fall, I think was the name of the 2-volume set of books, the war from the South's perspective. I've seen those pop up on Audible since then. I will eventually read them. Whenever I read big books like this, I don't want to immediately jump into another big book on the same subject. I want to kind of let it breathe. But I will read that to continue rounding out my understanding of the war from both sides, as it were. But it was good to read this book. It didn't try to build him up or knock him down. It was a just the facts sort of thing, and I appreciate that in biographical writing. This was published in 1994. I want to say that in 1976 or thereabouts, I think it was President Carter who posthumously restored Jefferson Davis's citizenship or something. He had it stripped from him, and then there was some restoration later, and then now there's this political tug of war as to the legacy of the man. Everybody can make up their own mind about him, but after reading this book, even if I don't agree with what he did, I at least understand it better than just the South is a bunch of racists and they hated them black boys and they they wanted to keep everybody in slaves and chains. It's like it's never that simple. And getting into the details in a book like this will help you understand the complexity of this particular era of history. So that is a recommendation for Jefferson Davis, The Man and His Hour by William C. Davis. Hey, thank you for watching that. Did you know that I'm also an author? You can check the description for a link to my book, Mr. Friday. It's set in a future where Black Friday is militarized and televised, and the best Friday fighters end up getting sponsors and backing, but it just so happens that the very best of them actually wants to take the holiday down. When he's approached by a couple of other like-minded fighters, he jumps at the chance, and it goes haywire from there. This is a short novella, and it's available in ebook format for just 99 cents. Drive safe. See you out there.